Welcome to episode 352 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Kelly Liberti Gardner, who served in the FBI for 23 years. In this episode, Kelly reviews her investigation to identify and apprehend the unknown male who abducted a 6-year-old girl from her home and abused her before releasing her in a different neighborhood 17 hours later. Using historical cellular analysis and familial DNA, also known as investigative genetic genealogy, the unknown male was identified as Justin Christian. This case marked the first use of familial DNA in Ohio. Kelly also reviews the FBI's National Child Abduction Rapid Deployment, or CARD, team. Kelly spent her entire FBI career in the Cleveland Division, where she worked primarily violent crime and violent crimes against children, specializing in child exploitation, child abduction, and child sex trafficking. When she was investigating the Justin Christian case, she was one of 2 agents assigned to the Elyria Resident Agency, where she spent 6 years working on all violations until the RA closed and she was transferred back to the field office. Kelly was a crisis negotiator for 20 years, and for 7 of those years served as the team coordinator. In 2006, she was selected for the newly minted CARD team and deployed on cases around the country. During the last 3 years of her bureau career, she was the central team leader for CARD. Kelly was also an adjunct instructor for the FBI, certified in the areas of crimes against children and negotiations. Kelly, a former broadcast journalist before joining the FBI, also taught media relations. After her retirement from the FBI, Kelly spent 3 years working as a child forensic investigator, interviewing close to 1,000 children for law enforcement or children's services. Currently, she works as a contract investigator on cold cases for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Kelly is also an instructor for the National Criminal Justice Center for Child Abduction and teaches negotiations for a private company. Now, before we get to the case review, I want to thank Taylor Adams for inviting me on the Film Nuts podcast to talk about the movie Boiler Room. We had a fun time talking about why it's one of my favorite crime dramas. I hope you'll check out my episode on the Film Nuts podcast. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can buy me a cup of coffee, join my reader team about crime fiction, where you'll learn all about the FBI in books, TV, and movies, and where you'll learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Kelly Liberti. Hey, Kelly, how are you?
Hi, Jerry. Good. How are you?
I'm excited because this is a case that got a lot of media attention. Of course it did, because when I was just going over the material, preparing for this, my heart was aching. I was upset because, as any parent knows, the thought of their child being taken is just a heartbreaking scenario.
Right. And especially when stranger abductions are so uncommon. They're really not the most frequent type of child abduction. Usually it's someone the child knows. In this case, we're dealing with a complete and total stranger abduction.
And I know one of the cases that I've reviewed, matter of fact, it's the case that made me realize that this podcast was more than just a true crime podcast, but a way for the public to really understand the dedication and the sacrifices agents make was the case review that retired agent Eddie Fryer made, the Polly Klaas abduction case. And this is very similar in the sense that the perpetrator went into the child's home and abducted her.
Correct. Ours has a happier ending.
Yes, it certainly does. Where do you want to start?
Let's start by letting your listeners know where we are talking about. I retired out of the Cleveland office and spent my entire career in Cleveland. So the cases that we're talking about happened in Elyria, Ohio, and Cleveland, Ohio. For those of you not familiar with Ohio, Elyria is a suburb about 25 to 30 miles west of Cleveland. At the time, I was working in a two-person office in Lorain County, and that's where Elyria sits. We had a very great relationship with the Elyria Police Department. We got a call in February of 2016 that there had been an attempted abduction of a 10-year-old girl, and there was a ladder found outside her bedroom window. So that's how this all started.
This was a 2-story home?
It was not. This was a 1-story home. The father of this 10-year-old girl worked for a local cable company. As such, he had some equipment sitting by the house, and there was a small stepladder that he used for work that belonged with his work truck that was typically by his work truck. But on this night, it was under his daughter's window, and it had not been there prior to that. What happened on this night, so we are talking about February 25th of 2016. And a 10-year-old girl woke her father up around 3:37 in the morning. And she said, Dad, there is a guy in my window and he's pulling on my leg. The dad got up, ran around the house looking for somebody, could not find anyone. She was in a raised bunk bed that was window level, and the window was a slider. Her window had been slit open. She said someone reached in and she gave a description. She said he had a mask on and that he told her, come with me now. If you tell anybody about this, I will kill your entire family. Well, this girl, she screamed, she kicked, she jumped off her bed and ran to tell her dad. And that was all we had at that time. So the Elyria Police Department responds. We found out about it shortly thereafter. And now we have a whole group of people. We're doing neighborhood canvases, looking for video, looking for any type of clues that'll tell us who was in that neighborhood. But this is in 2016. Doorbell cameras were really not that popular at that point. They weren't on every house like they are now. And as far as security cameras, very few, but in that neighborhood, no video, none whatsoever. So we had an open window, a stepladder that we really didn't know if anyone had used. That was it. Then we went back to the father had just put in an alarm system on their house. And when we looked at that alarm system, we saw that on the 24th of February, so the day before, that at 5:08 in the morning, that same window was opened per the alarm system. And then at 5:11, the kitchen door was opened. And then at 5:12, the kitchen door was closed. We also knew that on that day at 10:23 in the morning, the father of our little girl, his brother came over and he shut and locked all the windows because dad had noticed something was going on at home with these locks and windows. Now we go to the 24th and we see that at 10 p.m., the windows are locked, but the alarm was not activated. And then at 3:16 in the morning, the living room window was opened. At 3:30, that living room window was closed. And at 3:36, that's when our 10-year-old girl's bedroom window was opened and she was awakened by this stranger. And after dad went outside to check things out, they called police at 3:44 in the morning. So the alarm system told us something had been going on there. These doors and windows were being opened, but no one really knew anything about it.
Having those security alarm notifications, I would imagine, helped everyone really believe this little girl, because I guess there could have been some members of the family, some members of law enforcement who may have thought she's just dreaming or just didn't believe her.
That's a great point because that little girl was interviewed multiple times over the course of this investigation. But even in her first interview, what we found out was that she liked to watch scary movies. She was very active on social media. She would stay up very late. She had a whole system set up in her room and she would stay up late talking to people online. So we did have a question of, was this somebody she had met online? Was this a bad dream that she had? Because other than the alarm system telling us that these doors and windows were being opened, we really didn't have anything. But we did process the entire house for evidence. We took the ladder, we processed the doors, the windows, everything that had been opened. I want to go back to that day, that February 25th, because later that morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, so her incident happened around 3:30 in the morning, but now at 6 o'clock in Lorain, which is a neighboring suburb to Elyria, we have a 15-year-old girl who is grabbed by an unknown male, and he punched her twice in the face when she screamed. At 6:30, another 15-year-old reported there was a man in her driveway. At 7:20, a 13-year-old female was chased by the same man, same description, who exposed himself to her and made a derogatory statement to her mom. At 7:48, there was a 9-year-old female that this man picked up, and her friends were able to get her out of his grip. All of the descriptions from all of these people matched. They were all the same. And they all kind of sounded like the description that our 10-year-old girl had given us as well. When we looked at police reports for that area, we saw that the week prior, which had been Super Bowl Sunday, which was February 7th, or I guess a couple weeks prior, that there was a report of a male exposing himself to 2 female children, ages about 8 and 9. So we have all these incidents in a very short period of time, with a suspect who sounds very similar in all of these descriptions.
He actually sounds desperate, like he is being directed or there's some force making him want to complete this task of abducting a child.
Almost obsessive.
Yeah, that's the better word, obsessive.
We conducted our investigation. We canvassed the neighborhoods, all of the neighborhoods where all of these incidents happened. We had a little task force going. We did everything that we were trained to do. And we really didn't come up with anything. We came up with a whole lot of nothing. Of course, like you said, people begin to doubt whether anything had really happened. We did process that ladder. So that ladder came back as having male DNA on it, but that was it. And that could have been from someone touching it, could have been from someone sweating on it. It could have been from many things, but that ladder was also, remember, a work ladder. So how many people have stepped on that ladder, have touched that ladder, have been around that ladder? The kids in the neighborhood could have played on that ladder. Getting male DNA from that ladder really didn't do a lot for us at that time because we didn't have anyone to connect it to. You run it through the system, it doesn't come back. So we have male DNA, but it could belong to anybody. It could belong to someone at the cable company. It could belong to a neighbor. It could belong to anyone or, any child that's played at that house. I'm now going to fast forward you to May 2016. On May 21st, in Cleveland, we have a home where there is mom and grandma and multiple children, lots of siblings living in this house. One of those was a 6-year-old girl. She had 2 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. On this day, she was going to spend the night across the street at a friend's house. And that's how her night started out. She went over there, but around 10:30, she decided she wanted to come home. So the mom who had her brought her home and put her to sleep on the couch in the living room. But no one knew this. Everyone else was already asleep. So mom didn't know that she was home. Grandma didn't know that she was home. At 4:30 in the morning, this little girl is taken by an unknown stranger who entered the house, took her off the couch, and walked out the door with her. She's not reported missing until 11 o'clock the next day because they all thought she was still at her friend's house. So once the morning gets rolling and everyone's eating breakfast and the kids are playing and then someone says, hey, where is she? And then they find out that the mom had brought her home the night before and she's nowhere to be found. So she was reported missing around 11 o'clock that next day. There's an all hands, police, everyone is looking for this 6-year-old girl. And at 9:30 that night, she was dropped off on a street corner 2 miles from her home. And this 6-year-old girl walked down the street until she found a house with a light on. She walked up and knocked on the door, and a young boy answered the door, and she said hi. She told him her name and said that she had been murdered because she was too young and did not know the name for abducted.
Oh my goodness. Chills just went through my body.
So she's found. She's safe. She's alive. She's, taken to the hospital, eventually returned home. The problem with cases like this, Jerry, is that people tend to think once the child's recovered that the case is over. But what do we have now? We don't know who took her. We don't know where she was for that entire day. From 4:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night, we don't know where she was. We don't know who had her. We don't know what happened to her. She was interviewed. She gave a spectacular interview, and that started our search. But in the public's mind, this was over because this little girl's home and she's back with her family. That was a big wall that we had to tear down, is to let people know, no, there is still a case here. We still have an issue. We have to find out who did this.
I don't want to go into details, but I'm assuming that this little girl had been molested.
She was abused, and we did collect a DNA from her and her clothing as well. That plays into the next part of this, which is 1 week later, we're still trying to figure out who took her, who did this. We had submitted the DNA that we got from her and her clothing. It's one of those moments in your career that stays with you, Jerry, the one you always remember. It's like it happened yesterday. The head of our evidence response team in Cleveland called me on a Friday. It was Friday, May 27th. It was in the afternoon. He said, hey, we have a match to the DNA. We have a match to another case. And I said, oh, fantastic. Whose case is it so I can give them a call? And he said, well, Cal, it's yours. It's Elyria. He said, the DNA from Cleveland matched the DNA we found on the ladder in Elyria. And I'm like, oh, and my heart just dropped, because now we have a bigger problem. Now we have 2 incidents that we know this person was involved in, but we don't know who he is.
No idea. And then you have all of the other incidents that had occurred during that time period.
Correct.
What's the difference in time between the first incident with the 10-year-old and then the 6-year-old?
The first incident was in February. The 6-year-old was in May. So we don't know what's happened. When you work child abductions, most likely there's been something that happened in between. We don't know what happened between February and May. Was it nothing and it just started escalating again? We know we were dealing with the same person. Is it more than one person, though? Lots of questions at this point. We have run this DNA through the system. There's no matches. And at this point, Ohio did not do familial DNA searches, which is much more common now, but Ohio didn't do that at the time. We have DNA. We don't know who it belongs to. And at this point, we went really big with our video surveillance and our canvases. We had canvassed the neighborhood. We had collected video. Thank goodness in this neighborhood, there was actually a lot of surveillance video from private homes, and people were very great and they gave it to us. And we were able to collect a lot of video that we started putting out there through news releases and press conferences. What we found in this video was that our suspect had been in this neighborhood multiple times. We have this same suspect on camera by our victim's home, our 6-year-old's home, on May 14th at 2:30 in the morning, on the 15th at 4:30 in the morning, on the 20th at 3:30 in the morning, and the 21st, we see him at 3:21. We see him again at 4:29, and at 4:29, that's when we see him leaving with our little girl. It appears that he had been at this house many times. We know that from the family, this was a rental, and the mother had been asking the landlord to fix the locks and fix the windows, those type of things that did not get fixed. He was able to take advantage of some of those issues. But we had video. We see him walking by the house. We see him walking all around this neighborhood. And then in one video, we see him get out of a car. And we were ecstatic because now we have a car to put him with. And when we expanded our search out to businesses that were in this neighborhood and taking logical routes of how would I reach this neighborhood? What businesses am I going to go by to get to this house? We were able to find even better video. What we ended up finding was he was driving this car that appeared to be dark gray with a different colored front fender. It was lighter, so it actually been in an accident, been repaired, but a different color. And I remember thinking, this is fantastic. How long is it going to take us to find this car?
I've seen a photo of the car. I will put it in the show notes for this episode, and it's pretty distinctive. Just show it to somebody and they should be able to say, oh, I know who drives that car.
Exactly. And that's really what our first thought was. This is a great lead, and somebody should know who drives this car. But I don't know if you've heard the saying, that a car with purple polka dots. Once you start looking for one, you're going to see 1,000 of them, and you may have never seen one before. And that's pretty much what we ran into. We started looking for this car. And what we did is we had some experts from Detroit help us out. And our experts identified the car as a Chevy Malibu, 1997 to 2005, in a 6-county region, because we looked at the time, Ohio was, you had to have 2 plates. In our 6-county region, eliminating Chevy Malibus in light colors, we had over 2,000 Chevy Malibus. Through Chevy, we were able to narrow our numbers down to a 2002 or 2003 Malibu or a 2004 or 2005 Chevy Classic. We started running Chevys. We ran them with no spoiler. We ran aftermarket spoilers. We even had an analyst from NASA offer to do a paint chip analysis from what the car looked like under a light. And that came back as the car was metallic teal green, which it was not. We physically, agents in our office, police officers all around the area. I mean, this was just a huge effort by every law enforcement official that lived in this area. We personally looked at more than 500 Chevys.
Did you do this before you actually put the car out to the public, or were you doing it simultaneously?
Simultaneously. We went out and found a Chevy that looked just like ours, and we actually dummied it up. We put tape on it so that it looked like the one from our video. We had a press conference. We had the reporters go out and we said, this is what it looks like. Still, we got nothing. Now, we tracked down hundreds, if not thousands of leads on Chevys of different colors and that have been in accidents. Of course, everyone's telling you, people call up and say, hey, that's not a Chevy. Well, this is what we're going on, right? We spent months looking for that Chevy, in addition to following up on any leads that we had. We advertised on Facebook, did stories on the local news. We were all over social media. We got tips. We got lots and lots of tips. There were, boxes and boxes full of tips, but none that took us in the right direction.
Which is amazing because, again, I've seen the photo of this car. And like you, if I saw it while you were investigating this case, I would be like, yes, this is an unbelievable lead. We're going to find this guy right away.
Yes.
And it didn't happen.
And it didn't happen. We also had video of our suspect walking down the street. And he had a distinctive walk. And we thought somebody has to know who this is. Someone has to look at that and say, hey, that looks like my buddy. That looks like someone I went to school with. That's an old boyfriend. And that didn't happen. We even in press conferences, we told people, we're like, hey, this could be someone you would never, ever suspect. But even if you have any suspicion, just give us a call and let us make that determination. And we did get a lot of those, but we didn't get the right call. And all through this entire thing, I'd walk up to our NCIC and the folks that work up there who were absolutely phenomenal through all this, collecting all the tips and asking all the right questions. And every day we'd look at each other and say, we just need that one tip. We just need the right one. Actually, we brought in a unit from headquarters, from FBI headquarters, and they did a forensic height exam, which they were able to take some of the surveillance video. And we went back out to the same spot where they had this video. Through their magic, they were able to tell us through this overlay in forensics that our suspect was 5'11". That helps with the tips that come in if somebody is, 5'4", or if somebody is 6'2", it kind of helped us narrow it down. I was a little skeptical. I was like, that's great, but I don't know if I want to eliminate someone who is 6 foot because you just don't know. We had been doing so many different things that I was like, I'd be so afraid. But in the end, I will tell you that our guys were right on the money. And in the end, our suspect did turn out to be exactly 5'11".
Could you do me a favor, since this is audio and for the people who aren't going to go look at the show notes, could you describe what he looked like and what he was wearing?
He was in different clothes in different videos, but usually jeans and a sweatshirt. A lot of times a hoodie with a hoodie up, but nothing out of the ordinary. He was a white male. At one point, he had a beard and he wore glasses. I would say very ordinary, and I'll talk a little bit more about him in just a second here. We spent from May until November doing all of this work, chasing leads, trying to exploit any piece of evidence that we had. While we were doing this, the FBI was helping on this case because the child was returned. It's the abuse of a child case, so this was being prosecuted by the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office. We were working with them and Cleveland Police on this case, and they were having a continuing dialogue about this DNA and the fact that we weren't exploiting the DNA. But remember, Ohio didn't do that. So they did approach the Ohio Attorney General's office, and BCI, which is in Ohio, it's the Bureau of Criminal Investigation and Identification. They were granted permission to make this the first test case in Ohio to use familial DNA. On Monday, November 28th, I am cooking dinner. I think I was stirring some spaghetti sauce, actually, because I remember standing at the stove when the prosecutor called me and he said, Kelly, BCI has something. I'm like, what do they have? He goes, we're going to find out in a couple days. They're not releasing it yet. On December 2nd, we had a big meeting. The energy in this room, Jerry, it was just brimming because we're like, this could be it. This could be it. The Lorain Police Department, the Elyria Police Department, we had been working for months and really hoping that there were no other victims that we were missing. That was our biggest fear, is that this was going to happen again and we weren't going to be able to stop it. So we have this big meeting on December 2nd, and they told us they were able to identify a guy by the name of Justin Christian. And how they identified him was because when they ran this familial DNA, there were family members of his that were in the system. He was the only one who was not in the system. Now, this is a lead, right? So now we have to make sure that we have the right guy. But what we found out was that Justin drove his deceased brother's 2005 gray Chevy Classic. The vehicle was registered to a relative in Southern Ohio to avoid e-check, because here in Ohio, we have emissions checks and you have to pay for them. So in order to get out of that, they had registered the car in Southern Ohio. So that's why we never found it, because it wasn't registered here. He was a student at a local community college. The telephone number that we found linked to him via the college and some social media was also included in one of the phone analysis that we had done in the Elyria attempt of all the phones that were in the area that night. He was 29 years old at the time and 5'11". We discovered that his dad owned a body shop in Elyria and his brother worked on cars in Cleveland and lived somewhat near our Cleveland victim in the same neighborhood. As we got into the investigation, we found parts of that Chevy Malibu at the brother's home.
I take it not the part where the paint job was different.
No, by the time we identified Justin and did all of our searches, there were a few tires, a license plate, and one part with a VIN number on it. It had been dismantled and he had been getting rid of it piece by piece. He was arrested on December 2nd of 2016. He was indicted on the 5th. The DNA came back as a match. He entered into a plea agreement in September of 2017 and was given a 35-year sentence. The parents of these kids not wanting their kids to go through a trial, everyone agreed to this 35-year sentence.
We've talked about this case and we've kind of casually discussed two investigative techniques that were used that were what broke the case. One of them was the historical cellular analysis, which I have done a fantastic case review about, which was episode 332 with Bill Shute. So people want to learn about historical cellular analysis, they can check out 332. We've also talked about the familiar DNA, which is also investigative genetic genealogy, which I've done two other episodes 306 and 307 with Steve Bush and Steve Kramer that talked about that. Could we talk a little bit more about those investigative techniques? We all know when it comes to abductions that we do the neighborhood, that we look for video and things like that, that we seek the public's help. But in this particular case, these different techniques seem to be the key.
They were, because all of the techniques we typically use in child abduction cases were not giving us results. So all of our neighborhood canvases, all of the interviews, our little girl in Cleveland, our 6-year-old, she gave us a lot of information in her interview that was very helpful. And once we identified him, really helped to seal the deal on that. I think her forensic interview was also a good part of this. She told us in her interview that she was taken by a white male, that he had a square face and a beard and glasses. She also told us he had a cursive tattoo on his neck that was a name. Now, she didn't know what name it was, but she was able to recognize it, that it was a name. She told us that they had been in the car a long time. In the mind of a 6-year-old, what is a long time? That was one of the things that we had looked at was, is a long time 10 minutes? Is a long time an hour? When we did a search warrant after identifying Justin, he was living in Lorain with his mother. From Lorain to Cleveland, it's about a 35-minute drive. So for a 6-year-old who was taken, put in this car, 35 minutes, long time. She said that she had been kept in a house with 2 dogs and in a room with mooses on the wall. That was another big clue that we spent a lot of time trying to track down. What are mooses on the wall? Is it wallpaper? Is it stenciling? Is it a border? Is it a blanket on the wall? We tracked down, Jerry went through Gander Mountain and Cabela's and Bass and any place that might have wallpaper that would be mooses. I can't tell you how many houses I went into that had Olaf from Frozen on the wall that people had called in as a tip. When we finally did do the search warrant at his home, we had found that the walls had been stripped of whatever had been on them before. At some point, he had taken off whatever wall coverings were on these walls. She also described the 2 dogs. She had told us that she had heard voices of a man and a woman while she was there. Not that she saw them. She didn't know if they knew she was there, but she heard their voices and gave us enough that when we did identify Justin, it all fell into place. But before we identified him, we just had all of this information trying to find the dogs and the mooses. She did not have a description of the house because it was dark when she arrived and it was dark when she left.
That was a lot for a 6-year-old to provide and for you to rely on as part of your investigation.
You know, the details that she provided were so great that a lot of them, when we did the search warrant and when police go in and do a search warrant, they take pictures before and after, and they take pictures of everything they find. Her descriptions were so spot on that they matched the pictures taken by the investigators that night during the search warrant. And so spot on her description of the bedspread, of the sheets, of the mattress, of the room where she was kept, of the things that were on the dresser. They were spot on. You couldn't argue with them.
I think I read in one of the news articles that he had children himself.
Yes. So he had 2 children. And I'm going to give you some of his background because about a year after he was sentenced, one of the Elyria detectives and I decided to go talk to him and see what we could find, see if he'd be willing to give us information that could help us on other cases, see if we could clear up some cases, right? Like those Lorraine cases, maybe some other ones that we didn't know about. And we had gone back through a lot of cases in Lorain County and Cleveland that had similar MOs. We took all those with us and gave it a shot. And he did meet with us. And we actually sat with Justin on 3 different occasions and we talked. What he told us, it was very interesting. He had age-appropriate girlfriends in the past. He had 2 daughters with an ex-girlfriend. Those daughters and the ex-girlfriend lived in Florida at the time, so they are not here. He talked about both of the attempts and this, like we said before, this obsession of driving around and looking at houses and looking at any house that there was an indication there were children there. So if you left your Hot Wheels out one night, there's a kid there, he might come back to your house. He said he had been in a lot of houses. He didn't break in, but if there was a door open or a window open, that was enough. He would go in. As far as Elyria, he told us that he had been in that house multiple times, that he had kind of stalked the house. He had come through the living room window because it was open. He had seen the 10-year-old girl in her bedroom. Now, they had a dog, and there was also a dog in Cleveland. This is somebody who Justin had a very easygoing manner and was very calm. He said dogs liked him. He said dogs are cool. Dogs didn't bother him. When he went into houses, they didn't make a lot of noise when he was there.
Oh, that's disappointing to hear because I'm always thinking that dogs have this special instinct that they know.
Exactly, right? And I think a lot of us think that. I have a dog and I always think, oh, my dog's going to bark. And sometimes he said, if a dog did bark, he would just leave. But when it came to the Elyria attempt, he said that he went to that back of the house so he could reach the girl through the window because the back of the house offered an escape route. He thought there might be some cameras in the neighborhood. So he had driven around this neighborhood and he came back later looking for cameras. And when that attempt failed, he said he did go to Lorain afterwards because his compulsion was that bad that day. So, like we talked about earlier, this compulsion to act out on whatever it was that he needed to do that day, whether it was touch a child or grab a child, that compulsion was strong. So, when Illyria didn't work, he went to Lorraine, and then we have that whole series of girls being touched or grabbed in Lorraine that morning. And that was him as well.
When we talk more about the work that you did throughout your career, I really want to touch on that compulsion and obsession because that's what really makes all of these cases so frightening for everyone is how do you stop that? Let's finish this up first, but I did want to make that note how my mind is swirling with that thought.
So we asked about the Cleveland abduction. He had been in that house multiple times. He had taken items from the house. We knew that he had taken items because the mom had told us that there were certain things missing. And our 6-year-old had told us that when he put her in his car, she actually saw items that belonged to her sisters on the floorboards, some clothing and some shoes. He had been there. He had kind of stalked that house as well. He said that taking her was a spur of the moment decision. It was not planned. He drove around for a long time around Cleveland before trying to figure out what he was going to do. What's interesting is that so many of these cases have a social media connection, that there's some type of communication through an app, through something. In this case, there was nothing. He was not active on social media. He didn't talk to these kids on social media. When we looked for phones that were on in the Cleveland area, his phone didn't show up. He said after this, there was no activity for weeks afterwards because he truly thought he was going to get caught. He actually said, and I don't know if this is true, Jerry, this is just what he told us in an interview, but he said he left his car sitting out in Lorraine for someone to see for a while. And when no one arrested him, he moved it to a shop, and that's when he started to get rid of the pieces and parts of it. This was an obsession. He told us that he had been in more than 50 homes in Cleveland and the Lorain County area. Could not remember the first time that it happened. He had an attitude that empowered him and didn't have fear. So dogs didn't bother him, the fear didn't bother him, but he would not break in. He would only go through an open door or window. Sometimes he just stood outside and watched what was going on in the house. The scariest thing that he told us, Jerry, is that he had no deterrent. Nothing deterred him from doing this.
And when you say that he went into 50 houses, the whole purpose was to feel connected to the child inside? What was it? He wasn't there to steal stuff of value.
No, the purpose was to fulfill this obsession, this compulsion to go into these houses. Not all of it had to do with kids. And again, Jerry, I'll say again that this is what he told us. I don't know if that's an exaggeration. I don't know if it's completely true or if he said it to lead us down that road. I don't know. But he did tell us, and I'm going to go back to dogs for a second here. No one wants to get out of bed to see why their dog is barking. And that really hit home for me. I think it's true.
Oh my goodness, it happened to us last night. My dog was barking last night, and my husband and I kind of looked at each other like, why is he barking? But we didn't go downstairs.
Right. And he told us that people usually just tell the dog to stop barking, but no one gets up to check. And it's the same with people. He said people will say they hear someone in their house, but they don't get up to check.
No, I won't say that. I won't do that.
So those are some things that he told us about when he was in people's houses. And as far as the victims, he said the reason for this random selection, like what took you to this house in Cleveland, what took you to this house in Illyria, was that it's harder to hurt someone you know.
So he wanted to go outside of his community.
Outside of the people, right, not going to hurt people he knew. And these were random places that he would go back and go back and go back to them. We did work a lot with the behavioral analysis unit on this case, the profilers. I worked with a lot of them as part of the CARD team. One of the things that they offered up in their analysis, they said maybe his brother's death triggered some of this behavior. He told us that boredom caused an increase in his behavior, and that he usually offended during the winter months here in Ohio, so he could wear a hoodie to help disguise his identity. And you really can't pull off a hoodie in that look in the summer months here.
Could you tell us more about his brother's death?
I don't have a lot of information on it, Jerry, but his brother died of an overdose, I believe. That's why he was driving his brother's car at the time.
Okay, but his brother was not a young child.
No. His brother was an adult. So he told us that Sometimes he did take very small things from residents to sell them. Sometimes he ate things while he was in the house. Sometimes he interacted with the victims and would have conversations with them. And he said sometimes he entered homes even if he knew they didn't have children. He never had a real plan when he entered the home, but he always had an exit plan, as we saw from Illyria. That's why he used that ladder and was in the backyard, because there was an escape route through the backyard. He did tell us that he became, as these impulses increased, he became more desperate, more reckless. That's what we saw in Lorraine that morning, approaching kids on the street. That victim behavior influenced his behavior. If they didn't respond or react the way he expected, it would throw him off and he would usually leave. So our 10-year-old in Illyria, by her kicking and screaming and running and jumping off her bed and running to get her dad, that's why he left, because that wasn't the behavior he expected.
This is really a strange case because in most instances, when I've talked to somebody about an abduction case or where you hear about it, that was the main purpose of that person. They went out to get a child that day to molest, to sexually assault. It doesn't really sound like his obsession compulsion had him focused on that at that time. It's obvious that if this continued and he had not been caught or almost caught and stopped his activity, that it would have gone in that direction. But at this point where these activities were done, it sounds like it wasn't a target or a focus of his. Do you agree, or am I getting that wrong?
No, I think this is a very unusual case in that the motive is different, because his motive was more to follow this impulse or this compulsion to find people to maybe just touch them, be with them, go into this house, talk to them. It wasn't so much taking. So it is very different in other child abduction cases that we worked here in Cleveland. We've had a lot of different abduction cases. Our most famous one with Amanda Berry and Gina DeJesus. This is completely different. And the fact that he dropped her off on a street corner and let her go after one day was very different. That's an unusual thing to happen in one of these cases.
Thank God that happened.
Correct.
I'm sure this case would be one that many parents of abducted children would look for as a sign of hope that their child will be returned. I'm just quoting statistics that I've heard, but I've heard that if the child is not found within 24 to 48 hours, the chances of them being found or returned alive are drastically diminished.
Correct. Typically in those cases, those statistics are true, because we have people that, for whatever reason, they act out on an impulse or it's planned, but they act out. And then once they have taken that child, once they have hurt that child, it's like, oh no, what do I do now? And that's when we see these children get murdered, is because that offender has acted on maybe something that was a fantasy, something that was planned. But when that's done, what are they going to do? So if they don't plan on keeping the child for a long time, that child can identify them. And some of these people that we have dealt with felt like that was the only choice they had.
I don't even know what to say. I think it's important to talk about these cases. You are providing investigative techniques that others that are listening who are in law enforcement might be able to use. What happened to you in this case, as far as not being able to hit on some of those obvious clues that you had at the beginning, will bring them some comfort in knowing that they're not doing anything wrong. Sometimes the obvious does not work. But this is just an interesting case because of the quote unquote happy ending. And it is a happy ending. I don't want to diminish that. A child was returned to her loved ones alive. And so it is a happy ending. But there are so many things that happen in this case that if you were looking at a textbook on abduction investigations, it covers many of those things that would be listed there as what you could do or things to do.
Yeah, the FBI has a child abduction response plan. And because we're the FBI, we call it the CARP. We have to have an acronym for everything. But we followed the CARP. We followed every outline and in every best practice that we have in these cases. But when you deal with complete stranger abductions, this guy, Justin, he had absolutely no connection to either of these families. There was nothing to put him with these families. So when you have that, and then the lack of identifying information really, really made it hard. But at the end, because of the work that was done, because of the information that was provided in these forensic interviews, when we did get that identity, we were able to act quickly and say, yes, this is the right guy. This is the guy who matches everything that we have.
And I want to stress again that the difference between this case and the case that provided me with a true understanding of what these case reviews can share with the public was that case that I did with retired agent Eddie Fryer on the abduction of Polly Klaas, and that was episode 57. So I wanted to just mention that again because it was one of the first fully publicized cases where a stranger goes into a home and takes a child. And that, again, is just the worst nightmare for any parent to have to think about. I just wanted to remind everyone, you said that he received 35 years.
Right.
And that's a state charge, a state sentence. What does that really mean as far as Ohio is concerned?
35 years because this was a plea agreement. I think he'll get close to that. I don't have any information on his behavior, if he's been moved around a lot, anything like that. But I would suspect that he would do close to that 35 years. He might get out a little early if there's good behavior involved, but every case is different. So I can't predict that.
Well, I want to thank you again for sharing this case review with us. I think the institutional knowledge that you've passed on will be invaluable for someone listening to this who might have to work an abduction case one day. I want to spend some time now just talking a little bit more about your career and the fact that so many of the things that you did involved similar cases or crimes against children.
Right. So in my career, I served as a negotiator and a police instructor and an adjunct instructor for the FBI. But a good portion of it was spent working on violent crimes against children. In 2006, the Bureau created the Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team. That was created out of a need for best practices because child abductions are rare. They really don't happen that often. And when they do happen, they tend to happen in places that haven't had a lot of experience with them. Or maybe it's a very small town or community where they don't have the resources that a bigger city would have. So the Bureau created this team and said, we're going to train up this group of agents. We're going to make them specialists in child abduction and teach them techniques and really focus in on best practices for these types of cases. So I joined the team in late 2006. And was on the team until I retired. When I retired, I was the team leader for the central part of the United States. We would deploy whenever a child went missing, and that sheriff's office, police station, whatever it might be, if they reached out and requested our help, and we would go that day. But we had to be invited in. What we would do is go in and really say, okay, let's help set up a command post. Let's look at this case and go into our arsenal and say, okay, where have we seen this before? What have we done in the past that has worked well? What do we know works the best? Was the neighborhood canvas done in the way that would exploit every single part of that to make it the most useful information that we can get? Were people in every single house interviewed? Were any houses missed? If they were, did we go back and do them? Was every person in every house interviewed? Did we look in all of these houses? Did we look in all of these places? But bringing our institutional knowledge to every single case. And so the more deployments you go on, the more you get. And then as well, then you take the resources that we can bring to these cases, which are being provided. It doesn't cost anybody anything. And you have the resources of the cellular analysis team. You have behavioral science. You get divers if you need them, drones if you need them, planes if you need them. One of my first deployments was in Bemidji, Minnesota. And we didn't have any working communication when we got there. So we had to bring in phones because we had no way to talk to each other. So there's a lot of different things that come in. So the dogs, every resource that is available in the FBI will be brought out at a moment's notice on one of these child abductions.
You mentioned the fact that you had to be invited. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, typically, unless we know a child is taken across state lines, typically these child abductions are going to be local investigations. They're going to be investigated by the local police, the sheriff's department, the state, really not an FBI investigation, unless we know that there is some interstate jurisdiction. On some of them, if it's just, hey, this kid is missing, we don't know where this child is, and we don't have any reason to suspect they've been taken anywhere, it's not a federal case. But when you want those resources, it's a phone call. Hey, we'd like the card team to come in. We'd like some help with this, right? And then we jump on a plane and go.
And I also like to remind people that's done with the knowledge that if the person is caught, if somebody is arrested, just like in this particular case that you just reviewed, it's going to be a state charge, it's going to go through state court and not federal court. And the FBI is just going to walk away. They're going to congratulate everyone on the investigative team, but they're going to walk away and go on to their next assignment, not expecting anything in return for the work that was done.
Right. On to the next one.
Well, this is fantastic. I think we've been able to provide a lot of information about child abduction cases and how they're investigated and the FBI's role. Now we're at the point where I'd like to ask you my standard questions, which are when and why you joined the FBI.
Wow. So I joined the FBI in November of 1995. My previous career was in broadcast television. So I had my degrees in journalism. I worked as a reporter, as a producer, as an anchor. I had moved all around and I was working in Detroit. I came home one weekend. My dad was a police officer and just said, I just don't think this is it for me. Like, this is not what I want to do with the rest of my life. He said, oh, you should apply to the FBI. They're looking for women. And I said, what would the FBI want with me? I am 5'2". I have no background in criminal anything in law enforcement. And he said, you should go apply. You know how to talk to people. And so I did. I went over to the office in Canton, Ohio. And back in this time, Jerry, our applications were on paper. I filled out an application and really did not expect anything. Then I got the phone call to come for the test. Then I got the phone call to go for the interview. I continued through these different phases of the process. Then I got the offer letter and I thought, oh my gosh, what am I getting into? I really didn't expect that the FBI would be interested in someone with my background. I accepted, but I'll never forget when I went into my news director's office in Detroit and I turned in my 2-week notice. He looked at me, he pointed his finger at me, and he laughed and he said, you will never make it.
Whoa.
And I love that. And I love telling people that because it served as such an inspiration for me in the weeks to come when, as someone who had not been through any type of police academy, I didn't know what to expect. And so when we were out in the lake and it was freezing and we're running in the snow and doing push-ups and all this stuff, his words would come back to me. And I thought, oh, I will make it. Like my dad had said, being able to talk to people, being a reporter, you're sticking your microphone in people's faces and hoping that they'll talk to you, right? Having a background in being able to talk to people and carry on conversations and do interviews really was helpful.
I'm really surprised that anyone would not see the parallels between what we do as FBI agents and what reporters do. The main job for both of us is to gather information.
True. I think TV has given people a different idea of what FBI agents do. But you're right. It is to gather information and be able to write it up, whether that's in a report, an affidavit, whatever it might be. Being able to talk, being able to write is a huge part of our job. But I don't think that's a widely known piece of information. That's how I got into the FBI. And then they sent me back to Cleveland. I had grown up in Ohio. So at the time my orders were processed, Cleveland was getting a new SAC who wanted to beef up the ranks because there were a lot of people that were going to retire. And I spent my entire career in Cleveland.
Which is rare.
Yes, I retired as a first office agent.
Most of your career was on the violent crime squad you mentioned?
Most of it, yes. I worked some public corruption. I worked in an RA for 6 years. And then the remainder of my career was violent crime.
When did you retire, and were you able to use those skills that you learned in the FBI in your next adventure?
Absolutely. So I retired in 2019. And I spent the next 3 years working as a child forensic interviewer and interviewed close to 1,000 children in the space of 3 years, interviewing them for law enforcement or for children's services. Then I decided to kind of go back to my roots a little bit. I now work as a contract investigator. I also contract with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and work on some cold cases for them. And I do some teaching for the National Criminal Justice Training Center for Child Abductions. I also teach with a private company for negotiations.
Sounds like you're keeping yourself very busy. I like to give my guest the last word. So what would you like to say?
I would like to tell anybody who is listening that might be thinking about a career in law enforcement, if you're considering it, thinking about it, especially with the FBI, it is a great job. There's a lot of stuff out in the public domain right now about law enforcement and the FBI, but especially for any women listening, it's a great job. It's a family-friendly job because there are times when it is very flexible and you do work with squads and you work with the best people around. I've been able to raise 2 kids and not miss anything and have a great career at the same time. So I would highly recommend it to anyone who is considering it. Take a look.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to the show notes where you'll find a photo of Kelly Liberti Gardner, along with lots of case-related news articles and images. There's also a link to other FBI retired case file review episodes featuring child abduction and links to episode 332 with Bill Shute on historical cellular analysis and episodes 306 and 307 with Steve Kramer and Steve Bush about investigative genetic genealogy. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.